Your Excellency, we are working to Araya newspaper. We are going to have this interview exclusively for Araya newspaper. At the beginning, can you please tell us about your visit to Oman to attend the 27th meeting between the EU and GCC?
Well, I think this meeting could not take place in a more appropriate timing. We had been preparing for a peaceful meeting, but since Saturday, this expectation of ours became an illusion, and now we do have to concentrate on the crisis in the Middle East. We are very concerned about the situation there. It might seem to be far from Hungary, geographically speaking, but actually whatever happens in the Middle East has a serious impact on the security of Central Europe, because in case of war situation and suffering of the people in the Middle East, the migratory pressure on Central Europe usually increases by far. We do count on the GCC countries to be helpful when it comes to avoiding the escalation of the situation. We think that this is now the most important duty. This should be now the most important duty of international community, to make sure to avoid the escalation of this situation. Otherwise, maybe one of the biggest humanitarian catastrophes of human history can be created here.
So, how can you describe the deadly airstrikes by Israel on Gaza, and what is the next step of the EU to cease fire in the Palestinian territories?
Look, we definitely condemn terrorism. We were so hopeful in the recent years when the Abraham Accords started to take place. I was the only, not only I was the only European, but I was the only foreign minister from the world who took part on the signing ceremony back in 2020 in the gardens of the White House in Washington, when foreign ministers of both Bahrain and UAE signed the Abraham Accords with Israel. And we were so hopeful that after failures of decades and decades, there's a process now which might bring a sustainable peace to the region. That's how we saw it from the outset, right? And now what we see as a risk or a hazard, that all these achievements which have been reached, all these successes which have been out there, will just evaporate.
Yeah.
Will be in brackets, and we hope that we can still build on these achievements. I had a meeting with the foreign minister from Bahrain, who personally signed the Abraham Accords, and he encouraged me that we do have to do everything in order to avoid all the successes and all the achievements to go. What I think should be done now is to make sure that the civilian population is being protected.
Exactly.
And those people who have no responsibility in the creation of this situation should not suffer, right? That's the most important thing. We have rescued those Hungarians in the recent days from Israel who have requested, more than 300 of them. The Hungarian Air Force has sent its evacuation planes, and we have evacuated them basically. It is to our concern that we have a dozen of Hungarians living in the Gaza Strip. Now we have received the approval from the Egyptian authorities for them to cross the land border.
Yeah.
We hope that they'll be.
Lead them.
Yeah, we hope that they will be able to do so, because we understand that crossing that border is not the easiest job for anybody to do.
That was airstrike near to the border.
That's why they couldn't do it yesterday, unfortunately. So now we are in contact with them, and we hope that today they will be successful.
But many Palestinians and even the Palestinian Authority itself are accusing Israel that it's not willing for peace.
Look, what we can do, as not being Israel, not being the Palestinians, what we can do is to create circumstances and create a context in which making peace is an acceptable and affordable way of going forward. All right. So therefore, I participated personally at the signing ceremony of the Abraham Accords. Therefore, we have been always very supportive to a fair approach towards the agreements. That's why we're always very supportive to a non-biased and positive approach towards Palestine and Israel, both in the international fora, in order to create circumstances for them where it's easy or easier to get along with each other. And we regret a lot what has been happening since Saturday, and we regret to see, those hundreds or even thousands or tens of thousands suffering, losing their beloved ones, having fear for their own lives, don't know where to go. That's a real tragedy. We are living next door to the war in Ukraine because Hungary is a neighbor to Ukraine.
And this leads to the next question, please. Now, the Ukrainian-Russian crisis is still escalating.
Yeah, it's worse and worse.
And Hungary and also all the European Union countries are suffering from the lack of gas and oil and the shortage in power supplies, and also for the food supplies like wheat and corn and other commodities. What do you think about the crisis in Ukraine? Is it coming to an end soon, or it's a long-term war?
Look, here I don't have very positive news to share with you, unfortunately. And I also have to tell you that the position you will hear from now is very unique in Europe and does not belong to the majority in Europe. But I do believe that it belongs to the global majority. Because as far as I see, the global majority wants to see peace finally. Because those countries who have nothing to do with this war, those countries who have no responsibility in this war, are suffering and are faced with the consequences as well, just like you have mentioned. In Hungary, we have received more than 1 million refugees. Those who have stayed on the long term on the territory of the country, they have equal access to healthcare, to education. Companies are being encouraged to employ them. Our inflation, which is usually around like 2%, has reached a 25-27% height. The national energy bill of ours has increased from 7 billion euros to 17 billion euros. So we're paying a very high price for a war, which is not our war, and for a war in which we have no responsibility. So therefore, we represent a position that this war must be stopped as soon as possible. Unfortunately, the majority position in the European Union is determined by kind of a war psyche, So European leaders have, unfortunately, not turned down the offer or invitation or provocation of the United States to a competition, name of which is who helps more Ukraine militarily. And Europe has entered to this race, which is very logical because you don't go into a race with the number one military superpower of the world in military assistance. Come on. So now Europe is in a spiral. European countries are increasing weapon deliveries, although they are getting many of them are getting exhausted when it comes to the reserves. But we are the only exception, so we do not deliver. We have not delivered any weapons to Ukraine because we do believe that weapon deliveries do prolong the war. The more weapons you deliver somewhere, the more they will be used, which means more people will die, and the longer the war will take. So therefore, we urge for negotiations finally, to sit around the table. But what I see now is that as long as the weapon deliveries are going on, there will be no discussion about peace. And I don't see our European or American colleagues willing to change their position, unfortunately.
So do you think that the EU has to pressure on the United States to stop giving weapons, armaments to Ukraine as well as to Israel? Because yesterday the Minister of Defense announced that the U.S. Gerard aircraft carrier on its way to the Middle East.
Yeah. Well, we cannot put pressure on the United States, of course. We have to be realistic. But we should stop delivering weapons because, the thing is that that people are dying in Europe, infrastructure is being destructed in Europe, and it is the European economy which is suffering. So, I mean, for the Americans, all these so-called utility costs are not there. They are there for us. And plus, on top of that, European Union made very bad decisions with introducing sanctions against Russia.
Yeah.
Because these sanctions were targeting Russia, but were hitting ourselves.
Exactly.
You know, so we basically, first we shot in our own feet, then in the knee, and then at the end to the lung. And now the European Union is preparing the 12th package of sanctions, which makes no sense, because if you are able to look at the impacts realistically, without ideology, without dogmatism, without political approach, then you see that they hurt Europe much more than Russia. So why does it make sense to maintain a sanction regime which is more harmful to those who who introduce them compared to those against whom they are targeted? So European competitiveness is on the backslide, and for some reason, Western European politicians would not like to be confronted with the reality.
Before we go to the bilateral relationships between Oman and Hungary, I want to be back to the Israeli-Palestinian crisis. Yesterday, the Human Rights Watch official has warned from what they call a genocide in Gaza, because the Minister of Defense in Israel has called for cutting power, cutting water, cutting food from the Palestinians and left them to go to the Middle Ages. What kind of humanitarian crisis we are going to face in Gaza?
Or even in the wider region. I think that if we cannot avoid escalation, then this situation can easily turn into one of the biggest humanitarian catastrophes of human history. And our generation has already been confronted with a major financial crisis, with a major migration crisis, then a major health-related crisis when it comes to the pandemic. Then we were confronted with a major economic crisis as an outcome. Then we are confronted with a war in Ukraine, in Europe. And now possibly the biggest humanitarian catastrophe stemming from the Middle East. Too much. So, I think that 70, almost 80 years after the conclusion of the Second World War, this is not the security situation we would have imagined for ourselves, right? So therefore, I do believe that the whole international community should do its best in order to avoid escalation of all these armed conflicts, because at the end of the day, it's about the suffering of the people.
Okay. Some commentators are saying that this is the birth of a new world order, especially with the growth of the China and what we can call a Cold War between China and the United States. What kind of world order is going to be in the next few years?
I don't think anybody would know that, but what everybody feels and knows is that there's something new under creation, right? There's one very important development. If you look back to 2010, US had 30% of share of global GDP. European Union had 22%, and China had 9%. What is the situation now? US still has 25, but instead of 30. China has 18 instead of 9, and Europe has 17 instead of 22. So Europe has gone back to first place. China was promoted to 2, and now is a clear challenger to the United States. It's obvious. So now there are 2 scenarios in such cases. Either the world goes into a division into blocks, or the world goes into the period of connectivity. And it's obvious that the interest of the humanity would be to go towards connectivity and combine the efforts and combine the assets and combine the capacities we have in order to improve the standards of living all around the world. But what we see now is based on these conflicts between China, United States, Russia, and the Western world, that the world goes into more to be divided into blocks. And this is the worst possible scenario. We Hungarians have lived 40 years under communist dictatorship because the world was divided into 2 blocks and we were in the middle. And no one cared about us, and we were losers of the situation. And we don't want to be losers of such a situation again. So we are arguing in favor of the period of connectivity. But what I see is the following. The European economic growth had a very clear basis. this basis was the combination of the highly developed Western technologies and the easily accessible, cheap Russian natural sources. And the combination of the two made a solid basis for European economic growth. Now this is gone. It's over. All these ties of Russia-Europe cooperation have been cut one by one. I think it's only us Hungarians who still do believe that channels of communication must be kept open. And we are one of the very last ones who are still having a reasonable energy cooperation with Russia, and we don't even want to give that up, to be honest, because it's to our interest to maintain it. Because energy is not a matter of ideology. Energy is a matter of physics, and you have to consider it as it is. And now what the Western European politicians want is to cut relationship, at least economic relationship between, or moderate it, between China and the European Union, which is a very silly idea, I have to tell you. Because last year there was an 875 billion euro trade between China and the member states of the European Union. So now what happens if you start to cut it, to limit it, to moderate it, It's an economic catastrophe for us. So therefore, I hope that at the end of the day, political decision makers will get back a bit of common sense and rationality, and we'll be able to make a decision in favor of connectivity than the world being divided into blocks again.
Fine. Now we go back to Oman and Hungary. How much is the trade volume between Oman and Hungary, and what are the prospects of mutual trade and investments? Especially, we are noticing that the relationships are flourishing in the last few years.
Look, the relationship between Oman and Hungary is being based on mutual respect. So whenever we reach out to Oman, whenever Oman reaches out to Hungary, we always do it with the intention of making mutual benefit to our people, instead of judging and criticizing and lecturing each other. So our relationship is totally free of interference into domestic issues, which is important, especially under the current circumstances. So I have inaugurated the embassy here in 2019. Your embassy is under preparation in Hungary already. So the personal presence has a very significant meaning in this regard. We offer 50 scholarships for students from Oman every year on the Hungarian universities, which makes the people-to-people contacts stronger, which is an important base and stable base for the relationship. The Omani Investment Authority owns the one of the biggest and one of the most beautiful hotels in Budapest. And the Hungarian companies are showing more and more interest towards Oman, and the flagship here will be the strategic cooperation between our national oil company and company OQ. Now both delegations are here in Muscat, and they are discussing the possible projects on which they can cooperate. And today we have signed agreement with your foreign minister, on the cooperation on the field of green hydrogen. So we coordinate our efforts to modernize our energy systems, come more towards sustainability and green energy. And the trade, unfortunately, has been very low, less than $50 million, which is basically nothing. But it's picking up. Last year we had a record import from Oman, because of an increased purchase of aluminium from Oman, and now with the company-to-company relations to be strengthened, the trade will also pick up. Look, Hungary is in favor of strengthening the relationship between the European Union and the GCC because, as I told you, European competitiveness is decreasing, and now we need some new impetus, some positive energy. And if we look for regions from where we can get this, then GCC is definitely the right candidate. So therefore, we are absolutely in favor of visa-free regime to be agreed between EU and the whole GCC. Unfortunately, this procedure is now hostage of some corrupt politicians in Brussels. Look, the war in Ukraine has increased the prices of energy a lot, especially because the European Union answered with sanctions, and these sanctions have limited the volume and quantity of energy in Europe. And we all know from economic science that once you decrease the volume of a product on the market, price will increase immediately. So therefore, the national energy bill of Hungary has increased big time from 7 billion euros to 17 billion euros within 1 year. That's a huge burden on us. But we still have a very reliable and absolutely fair cooperation with Russia on energy. We are buying both gas and oil and nuclear fuel from Russia as well. And I can tell you that they do deliver on time, and they do deliver according to the contract. And when it comes to gas, the gas comes through Turkey, Bulgaria, and Serbia. So there we are not depending on the Ukrainian transmission system. When it comes to oil, their oil comes through Ukraine. We are dependent on Ukraine in this regard. They have increased transit fee around 5 times, which is not very favorable to us, but we have to live with it. If you don't have oil fields, if you don't have gas fields, then you are dependent on your neighboring region.
Fine. Do you have plans to import oil productions?
We have already did. We made a test.
I mean,
200. Yeah, we made a test. 200 kilotons of oil has been refined in Hungary, and the test went. The test went well. So so this means that physically it's possible to add Omani oil to our national energy mix. So it depends only on the commercial agreement between our oil company and yours.
How many refineries do you have in Hungary?
One big one.
One big.
Yeah.
Okay. Now, how can the two countries cooperate in fields of higher education? You mentioned that you are giving Oman 50 scholarships, and now Oman is seeking to increase the volume of tourism and logistics, free zones, fisheries. These are all promising sectors in Oman.
Yeah.
Do you have any plans to enhance and to increase the investments, the mutual investments between the two countries?
Absolutely, that would make sense. I think there's one thing we need here, because we have a political relationship without open issues. We have good people-to-people contacts. We have a respectful relationship. So we have embassies. So what we need now is a direct air connection that could put the whole relationship into a new dimension. So either Omani Air or Salam Air, we are in discussion. We would be happy to be in discussion about launching a flight. Hungarian government would be ready to provide the given airline by incentive also. One Hungarian travel agent makes now a test. From November until next May, there will be chartered flights between Salala and Budapest once a week. I hope it will play out well, and then I hope it will encourage the commercial airlines to start flying between Budapest and Muscat.
Thank you so much, Your Excellency. We are so pleased to have this interview. We are so pleased to have you today, and I wish you a pleasant stay in Muscat.
Thank you so much for the opportunity.
Thank you.